What does true courage look like? Is it a heroic charge into battle? Or is it something quieter? Something found in the deafening silence of a life lived alone? For one man, a man who had built a fortress of solitude around his heart for 13 years, courage arrived on the wind as a desperate scream, and the choice he made in that single moment would not only change his life, but decide the fate of a woman who had lost everything but her will to survive. Welcome back to Frontier Rescue Stories. This is a story about how a single act of kindness can ignite a fire of defiance against the darkest of human natures. Before we journey to Whisperwind Ridge, if you believe in the power of quiet courage, take a moment to support our community. Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a story of survival and hope. Your support helps us reach more people with these incredible tales. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Now let's begin. Elias Thorne measured his days by the silence between them. It had been 13 years since the fever took his wife, Annalise. 13 years of dawn coffee on a porch that faced away from the distant town of Redemption Creek, and he'd built it that way on purpose. The morning sun cast long shadows across his mountain ranch, a place he called Whisperwind Ridge. The light caught on the chipped ceramic mug in his weathered hands, a silent companion in a life deliberately emptied of conversation. He was a man in his late 40s, but the solitude had carved deeper lines into his face, making him look older. His life was a routine, worn smooth by repetition. Coffee at dawn, livestock at first light, fence work until midday. The ranch demanded nothing but labor and vigilance, and it asked no questions about the past. He built his morning fire with practiced, economical movements, a man who wasted nothing, not wood, not words, not emotion. The cabin remained much as Annalise had left it, though a fine layer of dust had claimed her touch from every surface, a testament to a life paused in time. And then the scream. It came thin on the wind, cutting through the vast quiet of the mountains. It was human, female, and desperate. Elias set his mug down slowly, his movements as deliberate in this as in all things. There was no panic in him, only a deep ingrained watchfulness. He'd been a scout in the war, and his instincts, long dormant, were now wide awake. He saddled his horse with the silent efficiency that defined his existence and followed the sound. It led him down to the creek bend, where the water ran clear and cold over smooth stones. At first he saw nothing but the familiar landscape of his own boundary. Then a flicker of movement against the trunk of a cottonwood tree, half hidden in the morning shadows. As he drew closer, his jaw tightened. A woman lay there, curled against a large, cold stone, stripped of her clothing and her dignity. Bruises marked her arms where hands had gripped too tightly, and her feet were scratched and bleeding from a brutal journey over the rough terrain. When her eyes finally found his, they held no tears, only the hollow resignation of someone who had seen the very worst of humanity and expected nothing better. She tensed, her body preparing for more harm. Elias averted his gaze, the gesture instinctive and immediate. The war had shown him the depths of human cruelty, but this deliberate, cold humiliation stirred an anger he hadn't felt in years. He removed his heavy coat, the fabric worn and faded, and took a step back. "Ma'am," he said, the word emerging rough from a throat unaccustomed to speech. "I'm going to leave this coat here." "I'll turn away." He placed the coat on a flat rock within her reach. "My cabin is just beyond that rise, when you're ready." He turned his back completely, giving her the one thing that had been stolen from her, a choice. The decision to take the coat to follow would be hers alone. It was the only dignity he could offer. He walked back to his horse, mounted, and rode slowly toward his cabin, never once looking behind him. The morning's familiar emptiness had been shattered by a complication he never wanted. But some lines, he knew, could not be crossed. Some cruelties could not be ignored, even by a man who had built his life around silence. He arrived back at his cabin and waited. An hour passed, an eternity in the quiet of the ridge. Just as he began to think she hadn't followed, she appeared at his door. The coat was clutched around her like a suit of armor. During that hour, Elias had prepared. He'd cleared the small second room that had stood empty since Annalise's passing. He'd placed some of her old things, a simple dress, undergarments, a brush, just outside the door. Standing in his doorway now, the woman looked both fragile and fierce. Dirt streaked her face, but her eyes held a steady watchfulness. She was judging him, assessing his capacity for harm, and seemed to decide he was unlikely to use it. Elias gestured toward the interior without stepping closer. "Spare room's yours," he said, pointing. "Left some of my late wife's things. Should fit well enough." He paused, uncomfortable with so many words at once. "I don't ask questions that aren't offered answers." She gave a single, barely perceptible nod, then stepped inside. Elias closed the front door behind her and retreated to the porch to give her space. He heard the careful opening and closing of the bedroom door, and then silence once more. A new kind of silence, one that was shared. A few days later, with supplies running low, Elias rode into Redemption Creek. It was a place he avoided whenever possible. The town had a way of falling silent when he entered a room, the residents' gazes lingering on him before deliberately turning away. He was an outsider by choice, a mystery they'd long given up trying to solve. The bell above the door of the general store jangled, announcing his unwelcome arrival. Martha Wheeler, the store's owner, set aside her inventory ledger and approached the counter. A resilient widow in her 40s, Martha was the town's hub of information, and for those who knew her, its quiet conscience. Her store was the lifeblood of trade for miles around. "Morning, Elias," she said, her tone professional but not unkind. "Flour, coffee," he stated, placing a basket of eggs on the counter. "And some fabric. Plain cotton." Martha's eyebrow raised slightly at that last item, a detail too specific for a man who lived alone. But she simply nodded and began gathering his supplies. The men by the pot-bellied stove had resumed their conversation, their voices pitched just loud enough for Elias to hear. "Heard the Blackwood widow ran off," one of them said. The speaker was Ellis Jackson, a man who owned more cattle than sense. "Crazy as her mother, they say." "Jedediah claims she stole family heirlooms," added another man, Tom Billings, who'd never refuse money, no matter the work required. "Reward for anyone who spots her." Elias kept his face impassive as he counted out coins for his purchase. He knew the Blackwoods. Jedediah Blackwood was the patriarch, a man whose wealth and influence cast a long, dark shadow over the entire county. He and his sons were known for their hard dealings and harder fists. As Elias was paying, Martha leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Folks are watching what you carry out of here today, Elias." He gave a single curt nod. He understood. In a small town, talk was currency, and someone had likely seen something. A woman walking toward his ranch, perhaps, or his coat around her shoulders. As Elias loaded his supplies onto his horse, he saw Sheriff Grant watching from the jailhouse porch across the street, his face unreadable. Neither man acknowledged the other. Before he could leave, Martha locked the front door, flipped the sign to closed, and beckoned Elias into the storeroom. The space smelled of leather, coffee beans, and molasses. She lit a lantern, casting flickering shadows across her concerned face. "The Blackwoods were in yesterday," she said without preamble. "Jedediah and his boys. They turned this store upside down looking for Clara. That's her name. Walter Blackwood's widow." Elias's face remained a mask, revealing nothing. He didn't ask for the story, but Martha gave it to him anyway. She folded a woman's dress, a chemise, and stockings into plain brown paper. "Jedediah claims his son Walter died of a fever. The truth is, young Walter was meaner drunk than sober. Beat that girl something fierce." She paused, her eyes meeting Elias's. "After Walter died, they treated her like property. When she objected to being passed along to the younger brother, Samuel." Martha's sharp hand gesture completed what her words wouldn't. Elias's jaw tightened. "How many of them?" he asked, the question clipped. "Jedediah and 3 sons. They're connected to everyone who matters in this county. The judge owes them money. The sheriff's sister is married to the middle boy." She pressed the wrapped clothing into Elias's hands. "When they come, and they will come, don't face them alone." Elias reached into his pocket for payment, but Martha shook her head. "No charge for these." He left the coins on a barrel anyway, slipping out the back door where fewer eyes would track his departure. The weight of the wrapped clothing felt heavier than it should, laden with the kind of complications he'd spent 13 years trying to avoid. As he mounted his horse, Elias found his hand drifting to the spot on his chest where his deputy's badge had once been pinned. Some habits, it seemed, died harder than others. He was no longer a lawman, but he was about to be drawn into a battle where the law itself was a weapon for the wicked. Elias returned to Whisperwind Ridge to find a quiet transformation underway. The cabin had been swept clean, the fire was stoked, and a pot of stew simmered on the stove, smelling better than anything he'd managed to cook in years. The woman, Clara, he corrected himself, stood by the stove, stirring with a wooden spoon. She tensed when he entered, but she didn't run. He placed the bundle from Martha on the table. "From Martha Wheeler. Thought you might need these." "Thank you," she said. Her voice was quiet but clear, the first words she had spoken directly to him. 2 simple syllables that somehow eased the awkwardness that had hung between them. He washed his hands at the basin, noticing the subtle changes she had made. The floor was swept, his few possessions arranged with care. She had imposed order on his sparse existence without overstepping any boundaries. "Smells good," he said, nodding toward the pot. "Stew, not much to work with," she replied, a hint of apology in her tone. "More than I'd have done with it," he said, the words coming out gruff, though he meant them as a compliment. They ate in a silence that had shifted from strained to something approaching comfortable. Elias watched her discreetly. He saw the careful way she held herself, the deliberate movements that betrayed both caution and a deep-seated determination. Her hands were those of a woman accustomed to work, but her manner suggested an education, revealing more than she likely intended. When they finished, she gathered the dishes without being asked, establishing her place not as a guest, but as a contributor. It was a silent communication, her way of paying for sanctuary, of maintaining her dignity. The next afternoon, as Elias was checking his rifle, Clara's question broke the silence. "Do you have seeds?" "Vegetable seeds." He looked up surprised. He followed her gaze to a bare patch of earth beside the cabin. "Some in the storage shed from last year," he said. "Could I?" She hesitated, the request clearly important to her. "Would it be all right if I planted a garden here?" Elias considered the hardscrabble plot she'd indicated. Land's not good for much. Clay soil. A small smile, the first he'd seen, flickered across her face. "My mother grew vegetables in worse. I know how to make things grow." He led her to the shed and found a tin box containing old seed packets. He handed them to her, along with a spade and hoe whose handles had been worn smooth by his wife's hands years ago. Clara took them with a reverence that showed she understood their significance. By sunset, she had marked out the boundaries of her garden with stones from the creek. Small furrows appeared in the soil, the beginning of order imposed on wilderness. It was more than just gardening. It was an act of putting down new roots. As twilight gathered, Elias heard the distant rhythm of approaching horses. "Riders coming," he said, his voice unchanged, but his shoulders squaring. "Best you stay out of sight." The dust cloud on the horizon confirmed his expectation. The Blackwoods were coming to reclaim what they believed was theirs. 3 riders pulled up. Jedediah Blackwood, his face a mask of cold authority, flanked by his sons, the brutish Samuel and the younger, more hesitant Ezekiel. Elias waited on the porch, his rifle propped casually against the wall, close enough to reach. "You Abel Carver?" Jedediah's voice boomed, accustomed to deference. "I am Elias Thorne," he corrected him calmly. "We're looking for my daughter-in-law," Jedediah said. "Trail leads here." Elias remained silent, his steady gaze a wall of defiance. Just then, the cabin door opened. All eyes turned as Clara stepped onto the porch. She was wearing the modest dress Martha had sent, her face composed. She stood on the elevated porch, granting her a small advantage. "Lena girl, time to come home," Jedediah said, his tone a poor imitation of paternal concern. Clara's silence was her weapon. It stretched, unnerving the Blackwoods. Samuel leaned forward in his saddle, a leering smile on his face. "Come now, Clara, I've prepared the room just as you like it." The implication was vile. "She stays if she chooses," Elias said, his voice level. That was when Clara made her move. She deliberately stepped forward, moving closer to Elias, a choice made visible for all to see. Jedediah's hand clenched. "This isn't over, Thorne," he snarled as they rode away. "We'll return with the sheriff. The law's on our side in this." Later that evening, Sheriff Grant did arrive, his face weary. "Jedediah's filing for guardianship," he explained, claiming she's unwell. "The judge owes him money. This won't go your way in court." "Do I have any say in this matter, Sheriff?" Clara's voice cut through the evening air, clear and controlled. "Ma'am," the sheriff said, shifting uncomfortably. "Legally speaking, not much." After he left, a new resolve settled between Elias and Clara. "There's no one," she said, her eyes hard. Just us. The word us hung in the air. The first alliance either had formed in years. The court summons arrived, formal and threatening. The hearing was set for Friday. The grounds were abandonment, mental instability, and theft of family property. I took nothing but my mother's locket, Clara said, her voice quietly furious. After the sheriff left with his warning that sworn testimony carried weight, Elias knew they couldn't fight the Blackwoods with just their word. I know someone who might help, he said. A man who knows the law as it's written and as it's practiced. I'll come with you, Clara stated. Not a request, but a declaration. The blacksmith shop stood at the edge of town, run by Mateo Reyes. At 44, Mateo was a man of quiet dignity, his hands skilled with steel and his mind sharper than the blades he crafted. Been a while, Elias, he said, not missing a beat with his hammer. Need your help, Elias said. Legal matter? Mateo wiped his hands on his leather apron and led them to a small room lined with books. He examined the court summons. Jedediah claims you as property, he said to Clara, his expression darkening. Then his eyes lit up with an idea. There might be a way, he said, taking out a sheet of paper. Not as a wife, but as a contracted employee. You have different rights. His pen moved with practiced precision as he drafted a document. An employment contract dated before the court filing, hiring Clara as housekeeper and gardener for Elias Thorne, with terms of payment and lodging. This makes you a free woman employed by Mr. Thorne, he explained, rather than a ward to be claimed. It was a brilliant strategy, a legal shield forged from ink and paper. The courthouse was packed. The whole town had turned out to witness the spectacle. Jedediah Blackwood and his son sat in the front row, radiating an aura of absolute certainty. When Judge Crawford called the proceedings to order, Clara stood, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. I am quite capable, Your Honor, as evidenced by my employment contract with Mr. Thorne. She presented the document. The judge's face fell as he examined it. Jedediah leaped to his feet, shouting that it was a ridiculous, hastily arranged trick, but the judge, bound by procedure, had to acknowledge it. Clara then told her story. After my husband died, the Blackwoods claimed everything, including me. When I refused to marry Samuel, they took my clothes, my dignity, and left me to die. Murmurs swept through the room. Finding no immediate flaw in the contract, the frustrated judge decreed the matter required further review, postponing the hearing for a month. They had won a temporary victory. As they exited, Jeremiah grabbed Elias's arm, his whisper a venomous promise. You'll wish you'd died with your wife before this is over, Thorne. That night, the smell of smoke woke Elias. Not wood smoke, but the acrid stench of coal oil and burning hay. His barn was an inferno, flames reaching hungrily for the night sky. Fire! He shouted, rushing outside. Clara was right behind him, her face pale in the horrifying glow. The fire had been set with purpose, meant to destroy everything. They fought it with buckets, a futile effort against the roaring blaze. By dawn, the barn was a ruin of smoking timbers and ash. His livelihood, his independence, was a pile of cinders. In the grim aftermath, Clara found Elias packing his saddlebags, his rifle leaning against the wall. You're leaving, she said, her voice flat. Going to end this my way, he growled, his jaw set. So you'll become a killer again? Like in the war? She challenged, her voice cracking. Sarah told me. The silence between them was a chasm. As they argued, moving in opposite directions in the small cabin, Clara's hand brushed against a sideboard, and a teacup, the last intact piece from Annalise's set, crashed to the floor. It shattered like a broken promise. Clara knelt immediately, tears falling silently as she gathered the fragments. I'm sorry, she whispered. It was your wife's. Elias stood frozen for a long moment, then set down his saddlebags. He knelt beside her, his rough hands joining hers in collecting the delicate shards. Just a cup, he said, but they both knew it was more. It was the last piece of the life he'd lost. Clara carried the pieces to the table and, with methodical precision, began to glue the cup back together. Things that break can be mended, she said, her voice soft. Not the same, but sometimes stronger. Watching her patient work, something inside Elias shifted. I'm not leaving to kill them, he said finally. I'm going to the county seat to get legal papers, a property deed in both our names. Clara's hands stilled. Both our names? A partnership agreement, he explained. If something happens to me, the ranch is yours. Clear and documented, he met her gaze. Been alone too long. Walls don't just keep people out, they keep you in. Together they finished mending the cup. It was imperfect, fine lines marking where it had broken, but it held together. Stronger in the broken places. As twilight settled over the wounded ranch, a single horse approached. It was Jacob Holt, the youngest of the Blackwoods sons, riding alone. A trap? Clara asked, but Elias saw the boy's hands held high and empty. Maybe not, he said. He's coming in open. Jacob, his face strained with guilt, dismounted and revealed his family's plan. Pa's planning to burn you out completely tomorrow night, he said, his voice low and urgent. He's got the deputy in his pocket. They're calling it a posse to arrest you for kidnapping. But that's not what they mean to do. This act of betrayal against his own blood was a life-changing decision for Jacob, and a crucial warning for them. Armed with this knowledge, Elias and Clara rode for town under the cover of darkness. They didn't go to the sheriff, but to the church. Reverend Michael Collins, a man who feared God more than he feared Jedediah Blackwood, answered the door with a Bible in one hand and a revolver in the other. He listened to their story, his expression darkening. Murder disguised as justice is still murder, he said grimly. He agreed to witness and notarize their partnership agreement, a document that would legally bind them together and protect Clara's claim to the ranch. This protects Mrs. Holt's position, the Reverend observed. But it won't stop Jedediah's men tomorrow night. No, Elias agreed. But it removes their legal pretense. It makes it murder, plain and simple. Just then, a knock came at the door. It was Martha Wheeler, and with her, Mateo Reyes. Jacob had gone to them after leaving the ranch. Word had spread through a network of quiet defiance. Martha brought supplies and ammunition. Mateo brought his rifle and his resolve. The Blackwoods have ruled through fear for too long, Sarah said simply. It's easier to stand together, Mateo added. Soon they were joined by Eliza Thornton, the elderly postmistress, who brought coffee and information. The Blackwood boys were drinking at the saloon, talking loud about settling scores. They were a small, unlikely group of allies, a shopkeeper, a blacksmith, a preacher, a postmistress, and the woman who had changed everything simply by surviving. They rode back to the ranch as dawn approached, 6 defenders against 8 attackers. As they crested the rise overlooking the property, they saw the riders coming, dark silhouettes against the rising sun. Jedediah Blackwood, his sons Samuel and Ezekiel, the compromised deputy, and 3 hired guns. Elias stood on his porch, rifle held casually. Behind him Clara waited. And around the yard their friends positioned themselves, not as fighters but as witnesses. Jacob stood with them, choosing his side. That's far enough, Elias called out. Jedediah was visibly surprised by the crowd but pressed on with his false claims. Mrs. Holt is here by choice, Elias replied evenly. And she's not alone. I'm not confused, Clara called, stepping forward to stand beside Elias. And I'm exactly where I choose to be. When Jedediah's authority began to crumble, Elias played his final card, holding up the notarized partnership agreement. Mrs. Holt is legal co-owner of this property. She's not your daughter-in-law anymore. She's my business partner. The legal ground vanished from beneath Jedediah's feet. His power, built on fear and silence, was useless in the light of day, before the eyes of the community. Samuel drew his pistol, but Jacob stepped directly into his path. No, Jacob said, his voice strong. This ends here. Faced with public witnesses and his own son standing against him, Jedediah Blackwood was broken. With a final hateful glare, he and his diminished party retreated. The immediate danger had passed. Elias lowered his rifle, and his hand found Clara's, their fingers intertwined in a grip that was both fierce and tender. They'll be back, she whispered. Maybe, Elias acknowledged. But not like before. Not with everyone knowing. The tension broke as Sarah Wheeler stepped forward. We should celebrate with breakfast. I brought enough for everyone. Summer came to Whisperwind Ridge, bringing green to places that had long been barren. Clara's garden flourished, coaxed from the resistant soil by her stubborn care. The barn rose again, built by the hands of the community. The quiet stand, as it came to be known, marked the beginning of the end for Jedediah Blackwood's reign of intimidation. One evening, Elias and Clara sat on the porch watching the fireflies. Between them sat the teacup, mended but still bearing the fine lines of its breaking. Sarah mentioned the school teachers leaving. Elias said quietly. Town's looking for a replacement. Clara smiled. Are you trying to be rid of me, Elias Thorne? Just thinking you might miss teaching, he said, his hand finding hers. Wouldn't have to be one or the other. She leaned her head on his shoulder, considering a future she never thought she'd have. The ranch had transformed from a refuge into a home. The mended teacup passed between them, no longer a relic of what was lost, but a symbol of what had been found. Strength in broken places, healing in shared silence, and the courage to stand quietly for what mattered most. Thank you for joining us for this story on Frontier Rescue Stories. If Elias and Clara's journey moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this video with someone who loves a powerful story, and subscribing to the channel for more tales of courage and resilience. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What was the most powerful moment for you? And don't forget to check out our playlist for other incredible rescue stories. We read all your comments, and your suggestions help shape the future of this channel. Until next time, take care and be well.